talking history about this and that. It's Conversations with John and Pat, with John and Pat, with John and Pat.
Hello everyone, I'm John Rickman.
And this is Pat Welch, and John, we're with the Conversation with John and Pat, segment 27. We hope will be better than 11.
Made in heaven.
Of course, 11 probably pretty good.
Well, yes.
So we're going to have to put on a fine performance.
Yes. I want to sing one. My brother, Phil Comstock, us two and him, we used to go to Nashville, to Nob Hill, to the Ralph Emery show. And after being on that show for a while, I thought, you know, these guys might be impressed if I write a song about the show and sort of down our little group. It doesn't take much to down our little group because we're very simple. You know, we're just two guitars and a bass fiddle.
And you take it well, too. You're graceful when they put you down.
In fact, we have played off of our mistakes for many, many years. It doesn't seem to bother us. We arrived at Channel 4 at 2 o'clock that morning. A fella cleaning up and locked the door. We practiced on some songs we intended to do. It didn't help us, so instead we paced the floor. Maud and Dorothy finally came and made a pot of coffee. I drunk so much I thought I would explode. We were so nervous and excited the day we were invited to the Ralph Emery show. The band came strolling in, wearing faded jeans and sneakers. I knew right then we'd overdressed a bit. We wore matching outfits with fringe and diamond sequins, cowboy hats and boots that barely fit. Then I heard the band strike up that old familiar theme song. I wished us country boys had stayed at home. We were so nervous and excited the day we were invited to the Ralph Emery show. Old Ralph came in a puffin' on a fancy drugstore cigar. Norm Ray was red from blowing on the sax. And there was Spider picking guitar, so it made my fingers jealous. There was Jerry Whitehurst in his famous cap. There was bus reports and weather, champion gourds and news and fan mail. I thought that we were never going on. We were so nervous and excited the day we were invited to the Ralph Emery show. Then a man came up to us and he asked, "You fellas ready?" He didn't know we'd been there half the night. He stuck our faces in a microphone and he aimed us toward a camera. My face was numb, my heart was filled with fright. Then old Ralph, he introduced us to 500,000 people. We forgot the words and couldn't hit a note. We were so nervous and excited the day we were invited to the Ralph Emery show. We struggled through our song, and when the show was over, no y'all come back, no kiss my foot, no nothing. Our dreams of being big stars had faded right before us, but through it all, us two and him learned something. How you can change your name, disguise your face, and wear another outfit. Old Ralph won't even know that you've been on. Yes, we're so nervous and excited 'cause we got re-invited to the Ralph Emery show. We had to change our name to get asked back.
John, you've outdone yourself.
Well, I won't tell you, it impressed.
That close to what your mother would call showing out.
We played on that show from 1980 all the way up to about 91, whenever the show went off. And my typical morning going to the show, we'd go probably 6 times a year, I don't really know, every other month or whatever. Ralph asked us one time to be regulars, but we said, "Ralph, we have jobs and we have families." We had regretfully
what time
declined.
did they come on the air?
5:30.
5:30 to how long?
And
that was original.
5:30 to 7.
Really, that's where most people at that time were getting their snow reports for where the school was in.
Yeah, they had all that.
They did it all. Yeah.
And it was a show that 70% of the viewing audience that watched TV during the morning that time watched the Ralph Emery Show. Everybody's 70% of the TVs were tuned to that show.
And that was WSM, Channel 4.
WSMB.
B.
And I would get up at 2:30, take a shower, get ready, dress, get ready and get in my car at 3, meet Jimmy and Phil in Chapel Hill in front of our parents' house in Chapel Hill. That was a meeting place at 4. And then from 4 to 5, we would be on the road up to Nob Hill and get there a little before time to do the show. And you know, after you get up that early, your body just wants to, at about 2 o'clock in the afternoon, your body just wants to shut down. You know, something tells it it's supposed to be sleeping.
But you were devoted to Coach Osteen from Chapel Hill, who was your principal, and refused to shut down.
And you know, the people of Tullahoma were always good to us. They've made allowances sometime when it was, and yeah, Mr. Osteen was always good to us. And I want you to read that, Pat, if you would.
Well, see, Peter, if you read it, John, it would be your mother would call it showing out.
Yeah, we don't want to show out.
We don't want
my Peter Jenkins wrote this book, and show the cover of that. It
Tennessee
was
Sampler.
Tennessee Sampler. He was a man who walked all across the country, and once he was writing about his
he was
trips
worked for ABC, I believe, nationally, didn't he?
Well, you're probably right.
Yeah.
I can't remember all the details about him, but he wound up living near Spring Hill. He thought Tennessee was the nicest spot he found. And so he wrote this book in response to his love for Tennessee called The Tennessee Sampler. And it's got all about Tennessee, about the Walking Horse show coming up, you know, this coming week. And
he got all kinds of incredible amount of little tidbits about Tennessee.
But if you're,
I bet was the Chapel Hill Ghost light in here?
I don't know if it was or not, Pat. It certainly belongs in there. But on page 26.
26.
And
we're not reading about the Station Inn, which is a great bluegrass.
He writes about the Ralph Emery Show.
Okay.
Go ahead.
One morning, most of the band was late, and the only music Ralph had for about 45 minutes was us two and him, a group from Chapel Hill specializing in songs about outhouses. The show does highlight some great new country talent, and how they can sing so well at 5:30 a.m. is one of Music City's mysteries. John, that is great.
Did he write about Barbara Mandrell?
Oh, I'm sure she's in here.
Or did he? That's not my question, Pat. I'm asking about the show. Did he write about Lori Morgan or the Judds? Did he write about them?
I see where you're coming, John. And again, that's that close to showing out. Under the title of Ralph Emery Show and the hundreds of acts that would have come in there, you are the only guest band noticed.
Could it be that it was a bit of uniqueness that he was pointing out, or cynical? Was it a cynical way of putting us in there?
I don't think it was cynical as so much as a show. Maybe it could have been, you know, who else is going to write about the steamroller rolling over my two-holer?
Well, we had a good time on that show. And Maud and Dorothy, the two little ladies that used to come in the morning, they would highlight things in the newspaper for Ralph.
You've done enough research on this. What do the viewers, what do they remember most about it? You know, to me, Norm Ray, I think, was a saxophone player, and he had a goatee. He looked, to me, his look was the epitome of what I think, in the back of my mind when I close my eyes, a saxophone player.
He was very nice to us. We played on Nashville Now one time, and he made sure that our wives were comfortable when we went there, and such as that. He was very nice. He played on that show. Another, we played on the Grand Ole Opry, and that date was August 22nd, 1980. I mean, it's etched here because that
was your first invite.
That was to the Ralph Emery. That was to the Grand Ole Opry. That we played the Grand Ole Opry, and you know, we thought we were going back, so we didn't even take a camera with us. We have no physical evidence other than maybe some tape recording somewhere that maybe we were on there. But you know, we felt like we would probably show up again. It wasn't any big thing. But it was a big thing.
It was a big thing.
And we're being told it's time
Well,
to quit.
let me ask a question.
All right.
Do you think the show being early in the morning may have been the glue that made it go? Because for a viewer like me, it looked like they liked each other. Really, it wasn't contrived.
It was a
wasn't put
live
on.
band. Ralph had complete control. He went to the Nashville Now, and they had cue cards, but there they didn't. And if Ralph said, "You boys just stay up there," you know, he talked to us. You know, "You boys just stay up there. We'll have another number out of y'all in just a minute." You know, it was just whatever he decided to do next.
Wow.
They
gelled so well together and mixed so well
They did,
together.
but Ralph was the ingredient. There were other people who tried the show maybe afterwards, but they never were successful like Ralph Emery.
John, did you get the notice that we were at the end of our time?
I did notice that.
Well, then that finishes segment 27, and it was a fine segment, but it is not the end of the stories. We hope we're coming back with more. Thank you.
Talking history about this and that. It's conversations with John and Pat. With John and Pat. With John and Pat.
Clayton has been Tullahoma's family shoe store for over 100 years with a reputation for fashion and personal service. And the tradition continues today. Stop by Clayton and see our large selection of fine shoes.
We're gonna fit your style. We're gonna make you smile. Service and quality at Clayton Shoe Store. We're gonna fit your style.
Hello, everyone. I'm John Rickman.
And I'm Pat Welch, and we're at segment 28, I believe, on the Conversations with John and Pat. Segment 28.
Ain't it great?
It's going to be great.
I've got a song here, Pat. I wrote it many, many years ago, early 70s, and it really is kind of appropriate for today because it's called This Old Tattoo. You've seen some of the body art that is being done today, and this song was written many years ago.
When you're saying today, you're not talking about the current day, this 24-hour period. You're talking about the times that we're living in.
Each day you'll see somebody that has a lot of tattoos on them. And this is about...
Let me ask you something, John, before you start really getting after it there. Is we going to have any kind of segue for our first segment here?
Probably not. I mean...
I'll sit here and enjoy the music, and also to see if we can come up with something.
Something to bridge it.
Yeah.
All right. I got a Dear John letter this morning from my sweetheart Betty Lou. She told me she was tired of me and she found somebody new. I'll never get over losing her, no matter what I do, 'cause I'm stuck here with her memory and this old tattoo. I could search around for another girl by the name of Betty Lou, but after loving her so long, no other Betty Lou will do. A long sleeve shirt or Band-Aid might hide what makes me blue, but it won't remove her memory or this old tattoo. Her name enclosed within a heart won't disappear or fade. I never thought that we would part when I had it made. How can I forget the past and find somebody new when I'm haunted by her memory and this old tattoo? Then I got influenced by a little story I heard from an old farmer in Marshall County. Well, I guess I'm like the farmer who was milking his cow old sag. Storm came up, a lightning struck the cow. The farmer's left holding the bag. Now Betty Lou's gone to greener pastures, and now that we are through, I'm left here holding memories and this old tattoo. Man, what a song.
That was something else, John. Did you write that?
Yeah, I did. I was working
During a
at
dark, depressed day, or
well, I was working at a mobile home factory in Chapel Hill, and there was a fellow who had a heart with an arrow through it with a girl's name. I said, "That is your wife's name?" He said, "No, that was a girlfriend I had before I married my wife." You know, too many people commit to these tattoos too early in life, then they regret them, maybe, I guess.
And I would say when the ink starts sagging as the skin sagged, that also what makes for some problems too.
Could be, Pat. Now,
well, it's a little stretch, John, but you said something about Band-Aids and tattoos applied with needles, so maybe we can go with that into the medical side of some history in Tullahoma and talk about Dr. Cowan today.
yes.
And J.B. Cowan there's our picture, thank you, Philip. He was the chief surgeon to General Nathan Bedford Forrest, and we want to emphasize today we're not talking about General Forrest, who sometimes can be a kind of controversial figure, but in the Civil War, the generals weren't down in a bunker directing operations from cameras and so forth. They were a lot of them were almost on the front lines. In fact, in Franklin, in the Battle of Franklin in '63, there were 5 Confederate generals killed in that one battle alone. So the generals a lot of times were close to the front, and their surgeons were highly regarded and valuable people, and those that were selected were historically noteworthy. And J.B. Cowan, General Cowan was born, of course, in the mid-18 or early 1800s. He was raised in Fayetteville and went to medical school. My research yesterday came up with 2 sites. One said he was educated in Philadelphia, and one was educated in New York. But Dr. Mike Bradley from retired history professor at Motlow, his research said that he was in Philadelphia, and so since we have great respect for Dr. Bradley, we'll defer that he was educated in Philadelphia. When he was right before the Civil War began, he was practicing medicine in Meridianville, Alabama, and after he enlisted, he went to a training area and where they were starting to ship him out area in Memphis, and while he was in Memphis, somehow he did well enough to get General Forrest's attention, and he made him his chief surgeon, and had tended to him multiple times, but the time evidently was the most painful. He had a boil on his backside, and Dr. Cowan said that was probably the most crucial.
That made riding the horse hard to do.
It made it really hard to do. He, after the war, he set up practice eventually in Tullahoma, and supposedly in 1909, when he passed away, he was at the old drugstore, which I remember it as Taylor's Drug, where the Veranda House is now. He was at a drugstore there getting a prescription for a patient and had a heart attack and died. And somehow, I've done a lot of work on this, John, but can't find out exactly what was going on. Somehow he
So right now it's a legend rather than
and possibly
fact.
A myth.
Myth, perhaps.
There was some kind of quarantine, medical quarantine for some disease it affected the area at the time, and they would not allow him to be buried in his regular plot. And somehow he was buried in the Harton plot, and Mr. Harton, that's so well known, John W. Harton, he was in his mid or late 20s at the time, and they buried Dr. Cowan there and then moved him to his current spot in Oakwood Cemetery. Pull up his foot marker, if you don't mind, Philip. There's this, it's in Oakwood Cemetery. Oakwood is full of history, of course.
Right.
And now this is not myth. I know that Dr. Cowan, this thing did take place, in that when Mr. Harton got a little bit older and realized that he would pass away at some point, he said that he certainly appreciated Dr. Cowan keeping his grave warm. And so we're getting a signal that that's the end of session 28, and wasn't it great?
Wasn't it great?
Right.
What's our fate?
Only P-Head can decide that, and this is the end of the conversation. But today, it's not the end. We've got plenty of stories to go.
Get your news first, fast, and free with your news leader on 6 every Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday nights at 6, 8, and 10 p.m. Local weather, sports, community calendar events, and a comprehensive look at the latest news stories and news makers as only a video news broadcast can do. Get it first, fast, and free with News Leader on Channel 6, your local information network.
Hello, everyone. I'm John Rickman.
And I'm Pat Welch, and here today with Conversation with John and Pat, segment 29, It Shall Be Fine.
Be kind.
Be kind.
Everybody out there, be kind.
John, we had to really stretch last segment to somehow tie your song to the program. Will it be another challenge today?
It's hard to learn a song for everything that we talk about. So let's just like two shows, the music show and then the talk.
And it doesn't necessarily have to tie.
No,
I understand.
No. I'm going to do one, Pat. You've never heard this. John Gray's never heard it. People out there have never heard it because I've wrote it years ago, and that's where it stayed, just in my
recesses of your mind.
my little mind. And if I can do it right, I think it's a cute little song.
Okay.
We'll find out. You know, every song in Chapel Hill and Marshall County is about an animal. This is about a flogging rooster. I'm so proud I was raised up in the country. Living on the farm's one thing I don't regret. I made friends with the billy goat, the bull, and the mule, but I ain't figured out that flogging rooster yet. I'd be out in the hen house gathering up the eggs when that flogging rooster'd take me by surprise. He would fly down on my head with wings a-flapping, pecking at me, trying his best to spur out both my eyes. When I heard that rooster crow, it was like a battle cry. He'd strut around just sticking out his chest. And what time he wasn't fighting, he'd chase chickens through the barnyard. But I do believe that he liked fighting best. I remember the frustrations of looking out the back door and the games that flogging rooster used to play. I'd be kneading in the outhouse, but I dare not take a step with that flogging rooster standing in the way. He'd lost nearly all his feathers from 1,000,000 different fights, the meanest little bird I ever knew. I told my mama if she'd catch it, I'd use my little hatchet and we could dine on flogging rooster stew. When I heard that rooster crow, it was like a battle cry. Strut around just sticking out his chest. And what time he wasn't fighting, he'd chase chickens through the barnyard. But I do believe that he liked fighting best.
I'm not too sure why in the world you buried that in the recess of your mind, John. That's a great song.
Well, sometimes you just don't think about the song, and maybe someday I'll start making that a part of our repertoire. You know, Jimmy, Phil, and I, us two and him, we don't use big words for our song list. but I think
And
repertoire.
one of those, I can understand why.
We don't want to overdo,
Well,
making it more than it
you
should
gave
be.
me a lot more of a segue this time than
really?
you did the previous segment, John. Yeah, that's one of my good friends from playing golf is Kenny Pack, and if you get him riled up enough, he's like a flogging rooster. So we'll
goes right into it.
We'll go right into a conversation about the Packs. And this week, I don't know if you noticed, John, but there was a really, really nice article in the Nashville Tennessean about the Mr. Bill Pack and his 5 sons and what they've meant in football officiating, and also they did a lot of softball and basketball officiating, but primarily they're known for the football. And I think Philip's got a picture of Mr. Bill Pack Sr. He was raised in Tullahoma, was a great salesman for Wilson Golf Equipment, and he was a really, really good man. And I've been corrected again. He was McGregor Golf Equipment.
If you come prepared,
I
Pat,
should have
you
done better.
maybe would know that.
Yeah, let's see if we can't do. Well, I'll try not to mess up any more on this one. Done that so bad. Mr. Pack went in the service at World War II and met Ms. Pack, I believe, at some USO festivities in New Jersey, and brought her to town, and had 6 children. The first 5 were all boys. All of them were good athletes. And Mr. Pack started refereeing some, I think, while he was still in high school, and as soon as he got back from the war, he was really involved in refereeing. And when I would begin to really know him, would have been the late 70s. I was coaching at Battle Grant Academy, and Mr. Pack was just almost legendary at that time, and he'd been calling for several decades, and some young feisty guy in his 20s or 30s that thought he knew everything about football, and he'd coached in 100 football games or something. Well, just being around Mr. Pack, you knew you need to keep your mouth shut. Mr. Pack had refereed for 5 decades, and he had such a great demeanor. He was absolutely
easygoing,
completely in control, and at some of the most hated times of a ball game where there might be a questionable call or something, he just could put you completely at ease, or maybe you wish you weren't at ease, but he had such a, and his rulings were final, and nobody questioned. He didn't escalate this situation. He was just so calm.
He was a gentleman.
He really was.
Really was.
He's been elected, and his son Kenny has been elected to the state association, the TSSAA, their Hall of Fames, and Mr. Pack's been inducted in the National High School Association Hall of Fame for his contributions to refereeing. And Kenny and I think some of his other brothers have called OVC games, Ohio Valley Conference games. Yeah. Kenny for a long time was a official there, and they called with some really top-notch officials that were from Middle Tennessee, Burl Crowell, Gabby Street, those kind of people. And they would have called SEC games and SEC basketball games, right. and the stories that Kenny could tell about refereeing trips, and the stories that those guys came along were pretty incredible. Show that that's the Mr. Pack and his 5 sons called at least 2 games that I know of together, and that I don't think has ever been done ever in U.S. high school history. And let me see if I can identify the ones on the 2 on the far right that look similar, or the reason why they look similar, they're identical twins, Bob and Dick Pack. Bob lives in Lebanon, and a lot of the interview from the Tennessean was conducted with him. And Dick is next from the right, second from the right. He lives in Tullahoma now. And then next, coming from the right again, is Pat, who's the youngest of those 5 brothers. And then Mr. Pack there, of course. And then Bill, or Billy, or Bill Jr., lives in Chattanooga. And then on the far side is Kenny, our golfing buddy, and akin to the flogging rooster. And we were so fortunate to have had them in Tullahoma, and to be honest, the state is fortunate to have them refereeing. I think every one of those boys has called at least one state final football game, and several of them have called several of those.
Jenny, the daughter, is a closing agent. She access title here in town,
Right.
and she's a great closing agent too. So
And anybody
let's give her a little credit.
Yeah, everybody is well, she probably can referee between the agents and the purchaser and so forth.
Good people.
That's right.
Mr. Pack used to work on scoreboards too. I remember
He
having
did.
him over at East years ago.
He did.
A few times along the way, and we had a scoreboard problem. He would work on that. He was a man of many talents, and but we're going to have to wind up.
He was a consummate salesman, John, calm, just like he was refereeing, and he sold from McGregor.
What I like your little story about him one time having a buyer for an answer putter.
He bought a putter from me, and I thought I'd made $1 million, and he had that thing sold for about twice that much in 48 hours, and I'd rather not talk about that anymore, John. And that's the end of segment 29. It was fine.
It was fine.
Why Joel Realtors? I'll tell you why. Joel Realtors is Tullahoma's largest full-time, full-service real estate company. With a 22-year heritage of quality and service, Joel Realtors is one of the area's most recognized and respected names in the real estate profession. An unparalleled package of real estate services delivered to you by 27 dedicated and trained professional agents, excellent administrative staff, property management, relocation director, and 2 of the area's finest auctioneers. Why Joel Realtors? Simply because they're the best. Joel Realtors, 209 South Jackson Street, Tullahoma, 455-0555.
Hello, everyone. I'm John Rickman.
And I'm Pat Welch, and we're here today for segment 30 of the Conversation with John and Pat.
And it won't be dirty.
Or my wife thinks I'm flirty. I'm not sure which. Let's go on.
Let's go. We need a thesaurus, don't we? Or a rhyming dictionary. This is a little song from my youth, and it is a song about, it's called Miller's Cave. And I may be hearing it years ago, probably established some of the way I write by some of this, but I like this song because you listen to it all the way through, and then at the end, there's a thing that happens at the very end that you aren't expecting. And this is our Halloween song.
Halloween song.
This is gonna
we're
fall,
planning on this falling on Halloween week.
This is going to fall near Halloween.
Let her rip, John.
Oh, way down south in the state of Georgia, among the swamps and Everglades, there's a big old hole in Tiger Mountain. Lord help the man that gets lost in Miller's Cave. I had a girl in Waycross, Georgia, but she had unfaithful ways. That woman made me feel unwanted, just like the bears and the bats in Miller's Cave. I caught her out one Sunday morning with a man they call Big Dave, the meanest man in Waycross, Georgia. I'd rather fight a mountain lion in Miller's Cave. That woman made me feel unwanted, but I showed them I was brave. I shot them both, and then I drug them. I took their cheating schemes to haunt the Miller's Cave. That woman made me feel unwanted, but I showed her I was brave. Most wanted man in the state of Georgia, but they'll never find me 'cause I'm lost in Miller's Cave.
Wow.
I would hate to be lost in a cave, being so dark in there. So that's our Halloween song. That's a little spooky to me.
It is a little bit spooky.
Does that fit in?
It does. It's you got a lot of spooky Halloween songs, John.
No.
The one on the Chapel Hill Light.
Yeah. Yeah, I thought about that, but I've already done it, and you know there'll be a time to repeat.
We still get a lot of acclaim for that one.
Yeah, I think they've actually played the one about the light twice.
All right.
Not that we're counting.
No.
But
We're taking note.
spooky times in Chapel Hill, Tennessee was Halloween. We took complete advantage of Halloween because there was a lot of things that went on. You know, egg throwing, pumpkin throwing, wrapping trees with toilet paper. Now, we want to say this isn't recommended, nor do we promote this type.
Yeah, we're not admitting to our mothers that we would have participated even then.
Absolutely not.
And absolutely not now.
But it was a time of just doing, you know, having fun. I remember myself at Forest High. They would maybe go to a farmer's house or a barn or whatever and take his wagon, disassemble it, and then reassemble it on top of the schoolhouse. Isn't that something? But just think of all the educational value that had. You know, they were working together as a team.
Yeah.
And
it's a wonder you didn't get shop credit for that, John.
I remember at the end of when after Halloween was over in the school, you know, where there would be things that people brought up to the school and sat by the door and pulled up old tires and whatever, you know, all kinds of mischief. Mr. Barnes, our principal, he would come to the shop class and he'd say, any of you boys want to help clean up the campus? And we'd all get up. We was all happy to get out of class, you know. You weren't that way though, were you? I mean,
well, we'll tell a little bit of a tale on a following segment when we talk about Mr. McClure, John. That was. I'd rather not get into some of my
now
bad ways
in
too many different segments.
In Tullahoma, you know, I don't know of all what went on because I'm not of the age that I would, you know, be participating. But I remember my wife, when we were married, started a family here in Tullahoma, it was very important to her to get the kids out and know what neighborhoods to go get candy. And we would definitely go to friends that we were acquainted with, you know, look at the kids, how they're dressed up, you know, and this sort of thing. But then to really beef up your sack or bucket or whatever it is that you would, maybe a little pumpkin type of
plastic pumpkin
and hope to fill it up with all kind of candies and treats, delights. She would go to a neighborhood, and you asked me which neighborhood was it that they went to, and I can't remember. I know that the houses were all close together. Mm-hmm. So, you know, there wasn't a lot of walking time in between, and the kids, they'd come home and then they'd bring all that candy home, and Daddy'd eat about half of it. It was a wonderful time, you know, and we didn't particularly want apples and
bananas,
oranges. We weren't into that so much, but we were we liked the candy, the sugar, I'm sure. But we had a great time, and we're told, Pat, that it's almost time for us to close down shop.
We hope that this being Halloween week, that everyone has a safe Halloween.
Very safe. You know, back when I was a child, I don't think things, the safety there were hazards like there are today.
Yeah.
There are
And
some
the-
hazards
and
that
the
are out
tricks-
there that maybe
The pranks didn't get across the line probably in Chapel Hill like
and nobody took you serious.
right.
They were young too one time.
That's
they
right.
remembered how it was.
That's right. Well, let's wrap this up, John. This closes out segment 30.
30.
But it's not the end of the conversations. There's more to come. If P. Head will lay in there with us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Since 1917, Builder Supply has been the place to go for all your building materials. It's where the contractors have shopped for years. Builder Supply stocks quality Benjamin Moore paint, Temco shingles, case knives, DeWalt, Stanley, and Makita tools, Peachtree's Southern Rose and Sun windows, Trader's grills, Quickset locks, General Shell brick, Yellow wood, and pass load nail guns and nails. Experienced salespeople are there to help you find the right products for your job. So when you're ready to build, whether large or small, think Builder Supply, 301 South Atlantic Street in Tullahoma.
Hello, everyone. I'm John Rickman, and this is
Pat Welch, and we're here for segment 31 of
Ain't
the
it fun?
conversation with John and Pat. 31. Ain't it fun?
Pat. Like we've talked before, we have no segue into what we're going to talk about because this is going to be a silly what I'm singing, but what we're going to talk about is not so silly.
Well, I've stretched a few of them. We'll see what we can
It's a
stretch
big
one
stretch.
today.
They passed an ordinance in the town, said we'd have to tear it down. That little old house out back so dear to me. Though the health department said its day was over and dead, it will live forever in my memory. Don't let them tear that little brown building down. Don't let them tear that precious building down. Don't let them tear that little brown building down, for there's not another like it in the country or the town. Wasn't many years ago when I'd go tripping through the snow to that little old house behind my old hound dogs. There I'd sit me down to rest like a snowbird on his nest and read the Sears and Roebuck catalog. I would hum a happy tune peeping through the quarter moon as my daddy's kin had done in years before. It was just a happy spot where daily cares could be forgot, and it gave the same relief to rich and poor. Don't let them tear that little brown building down. Don't let them tear that precious building down. Don't let them tear that little brown building down, for there's not another like it in the country or the town. Well, it wasn't a castle fair, but I could dream a future there and build my castles to the Yellow Jackets' drone. I could orbit around the sun, fight with General Washington, or be a king upon a royal throne. Wasn't fancy built at all, it had newspapers on the wall. It was air conditioned in the winter time. It was just a humble hut, but the doors were never shut, and a man could get inside without a dime. Don't let them tear that little brown building down. Don't let them tear that precious building down. Don't let them tear that little brown building down, for there's not another like it in the country or the town.
John, that was fantastic.
Well, it's a little song that I learned probably in the early 60s. It was written by a fellow named Billy Ed Wheeler, who's been a successful songwriter in Nashville. But that's the sort of thing that I learned. Good. I don't know why it made me laugh. It makes me laugh today.
You gave me a little bit of a challenge, but one of the first lines you said something about ordinances. And I'm going to talk a little bit today. We've reminisce about Mr. Creed McClure, who, when he was principal, laid down several ordinances and enforced several ordinances. But Mr. McClure was really well known in the 70s, especially when he served on the legislative board of the TSSAA. And
Pat, let me interrupt just a second,
me.
because Mr. McClure and Ms. McClure were a teaching team.
Correct.
He coached, taught,
His wife's
principal.
name was Blanche, and she was
Nice,
a great teacher.
Great.
Yeah,
Good personalities.
Great personality, yeah. And he was tough as a pine knot, and she was soft and nice, sweet. They really complemented each other really well, I thought. He played football and was supposed to really been good at Tennessee Tech. And I thought he was, to me, looked like maybe when he was, when I knew him, when he'd been in his 50s and 60s, he was probably maybe 175, 180 pounds. But so I thought he was a running back or receiver or something, but he was a guard, and they said he was really good. So he had to have been a pretty tough character. He coached. He was originally, I believe, he was originally from McMinnville, and he coached at old McMinnville City for a while. But he came to Tullahoma either 49 or 50 to be the head coach at the old high school. It's on the present East Lincoln Elementary campus now. And he had several decent teams, but he had a great undefeated team. I believe they were tied once in 1955, and he had several players one of which we'll talk about probably in our next segment. And after that season, 55, he retired from coaching, and Coach Cooper, W.C. Cooper, who we talked about here before, he had been his assistant, I think, in 54 or 53, something like that, and left to go to La Follette to be the head coach. As soon as he had a chance to come back to Tullahoma, he could hardly wait, and he came to Tullahoma in 56. But anyway, Mr. McClure went into administration, and I believe he was principal at West Junior High when it was first built. But it was soon after that he became, at least in the mid-60s or so, he became principal at the high school. And he was revered. Our field house is named after him, and the fundraising for the field house was raised in his name. And I don't know what the present field house would ever been built if his name hadn't been put on it, because he was so well respected. And I thought we could tell at least one story when I was.
Did we show Mr. McClure's picture?
Let's get that picture. This is a TSSAA legislative board at the time, and Mr. McClure is second from the left. They're standing up. And that little serious scowl he's got on his face, if he looked at you in the hall like that, a man come to an abrupt halt, that's for sure. He called me in when I was a junior I hadn't done anything too grievous, but for a little counseling session, and he knew me a little bit from.
He's trying to steer you.
Yeah. He knew me from playing football a little bit, and of course he would have taken a lot of interest in the football program since he'd been a past coach. And so he called me in and sat me down, and we covered several facets of life in general. And finally he got to the point where when he got real serious, he got a real gravelly voice, and he called you by your last name, and he says, "Welsh, you'll have to remember there was a time in my life where there wasn't a man on the face of earth I couldn't whip." And it like broke me out in a cold sweat, because I immediately thought, well, you know, if he could beat everybody 250 pounds on up when he was young, he could probably take care of me, 135 pound shrimp now. And I've really watched what I said and did anywhere close to him for a long time after that. And I was probably in his late, or at least mid-30s, before I realized he used a lot of psychology on me then, and it was very effective.
It worked.
Yeah, it worked. He definitely made an impression on me that day.
Pat, we've got to end this today.
Well, that was still a great segment. Mr. McClure was a great man, and his wife was a great lady, and their daughter Beth was a great girl too. And that ends segment 31, but it's not the end of the conversations. We've got several topics to go. Thank you.
It's not invoice. It's not MSRP. It's not Christmas Day, although it may feel like it. It's the lowest prices in Middle Tennessee, period. Get to Stan McNabb Chrysler Dodge Jeep Ram or Stan McNabb Chevrolet Buick GMC Cadillac before these prices are gone forever.
Hello, I'm John Rickman.
And I'm Pat Welch, and we're here today for the segment 32 of Conversations with John and Pat.
It's not new.
It's 32. That's right.
Well, this song is one that was sung back in the 50s. I think Sonny. I can't remember his last name, but he sang this song, and it became a hit in the 50s, and it was called Running Bear. And it's about a brave and his Indian maid falling in love, and it was such a hit that it was popular for anyone who was trying to sing the song or want to sing the song. And also, I remember it so well because my Uncle Nub and Buddy Johns, they were livestock traders in Chapel Hill, and on the running board really was the bumper of the truck. They had it Running Bear on this double-decker pig truck. They would buy a little litter of pigs out in the counties around Chapel Hill, and then they would bring them into their feed lot, feed them up to a certain size, load them up, and take them to Indiana. Take all these. So Uncle Buddy, he was on the road all the time, back and forth in the truck Running Bear, back and forth. And then Nub, he was buying up pigs all around the counties. But anyway, this song.
Now, I want to make sure I've got everything right now. Nub Johns is your mother's brother. Is
and
that correct?
Buddy also.
Okay.
Buddy, by the way, graduated the same year George Orr graduated from Chapel Hill. They were sort of running buddies. This is Running Bear.
Yeah.
On the banks of the river stood Running Bear, young and brave. And on the other side of the river stood this lovely Indian maid, Little White Dove was her name, such a lovely sight to see. But their tribes fought with each other, so their love could never be. Running Bear loved Little White Dove with a love big as the sky. Running Bear loved Little White Dove with a love that wouldn't die. He couldn't swim the raging river, 'cause the river was too wide. He couldn't get to Little White Dove standing on the other side. In the moonlight, he could see her throwing kisses across the wave. Her little heart was beating faster, waiting for her Indian brave. Running Bear dove in the water, Little White Dove, she did the same. And they swam out to each other through the swirling stream. They came as their hands touched and their lips met. The raging river pulled them down. Now they'll always be together in that happy hunting ground. Running Bear loved Little White Dove with a love big as the sky. Running Bear loved Little White Dove with a love that wouldn't die. With a love that wouldn't die.
I've heard that song several times. John, don't know if it ever been done as well.
Yeah,
But I don't know that I've ever paid attention to
Sonny
the lyrics.
James. Sonny James was the singer, with the entertainer that
was-
did that song.
Back late 50s and early 60s,
Yeah.
most young love was tragic. A lot of automobile accidents and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
Teen Angel and all those songs.
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah. But I didn't realize that we had one on the Indians, too.
Nub and Buddy.
Yeah.
They were now Norman Cecil Johns was his name, but I don't know how he got that name, Nub, and I don't know how Buddy got his name.
Somehow you got different roles in families, that's for sure, because your mother's prim and proper and honorable as lady as she is. It's the stories of Nub and Buddy
She kept
are direct
everybody in line.
contrast.
That's right, exactly.
All right. Not sure how we're going to do this or what the segue would be, but
We never know, but it sort of works, pieces itself
somehow
together.
it all comes together.
We might
and,
leave out important parts
yeah.
from time to time, but
Well, Running Bear was a great part of Indian lore and great part of Tullahoma football lore. It was a man named Frank Mullins.
yes.
So we'll talk about Frank today. The youth league is named after him. He was really involved in Little League baseball and youth sports when he was older, but he was a great tailback and single wing tailback where the ball was centered mostly to the tailback, and you had to have a great athlete there to make that offense go. And single wing, of course, what General Neyland ran at UT. But he would have played for Mr. McClure, who we talked about last week, that became principal at the high school. And by the time they were seniors, their senior year, their record was 9-0-1. I believe Lewisburg tied them. And he was a small guy. I really believe at the start of the year, a guy named Jack Haywood was supposed to be the tailback, and he got hurt. And Frank came in, and I don't believe anybody had any idea, as quick as he was, that he was going to be that good. He really was a great player. Dr. Snoddy told me one time that he had some pretty good sickness, and came to him on Friday morning. They checked him out of school, and he got him some medicine, and somebody said, well, can he play tonight? And he said, well, he could play, but he said he's not going to be very good. I said, that wouldn't be my advice, and not going to hurt him medically, but he's probably, like I say, he's not going to, couldn't do too well as sick as he is right now. And Frank went ahead and played and gained about 200 yards. And Dr. Snoddy said he never was going to limit anybody's amount of success they could have again. Frank had. Let's see that picture. There it is. That's Mr. McClure that we talked about last week on the right, Coach McClure, which I think was his 5th season at the high school. Frank is number 46 in the middle, and 58 was Bobby Jack Daniel, who's still alive in Tullahoma. And there were 4 or 5 of those players on that season that ended up playing at Swanee for Coach Shirley Majors, and Frank was one of them, and Bobby Jack was one of them. But that's right there is a picture of 3 important figures of that 55 team, and
Frank had
really
has a son named Mark, who played on a successful team here in Tullahoma.
Played in the late 70s, and they got football had been a little bit on hard times, and they've really had a fine team, and Mark was an integral part of that. He had 2 daughters, Lisa and Stacy.
And Glenda was the wife, and she passed away sometime after Frank
Frank died prematurely.
Frank had some heart problems, issues that was finally his demise.
I'll tell you one great story on him if P-Head doesn't run us off for going a little bit over on this one. When Mark was playing, Frank was down at the field house one day, and somebody was out for a Charlie horse, which is a bruise in your quad muscle on your thigh. And they'd had a run of those, I think, and Frank couldn't understand it, and he told Dan Bland, who was the head coach at the time and a real successful coach at the high school. He said, I don't understand about these Charlie horses. I never had a Charlie horse, and nobody and I never knew. We didn't have anybody have a Charlie horse. And Coach Bland said, well, do you understand you have to have a quad muscle before you can have a Charlie horse? And Frank, of course, was small. He probably wouldn't have a very big quad, but they said he hung his head, and that was the end of the discussion. The Charlie horse was a time after we started lifting weights and got your legs built up a little bit more, maybe.
Well, thank you, Pat, for sharing that. And it was good talking about Frank Mullins.
He was a very, very important and recognized person.
The Mullins Football League has been going on, and when you think about the name, it always goes back to him.
That's right. And so that will be the end of Conversation with John and Pat, segment 32, but it's not the end of the conversations. We hope that P. Head will let us come back one more time.
Wondering how the Affordable Care Act or Obamacare affects you? Lester Green & McCord Insurance Agency will be happy to explain how these changes affect you. Now with the healthcare exchange, it can get pretty complicated. We'll be glad to walk you through these changes and answer your questions. If you're an employer or individual, call us for more information. Lester Green & McCord Insurance Agency, the answer to your Affordable Care Act questions.
Hello, everyone. I'm John Rickman.
And I'm Pat Welch. And here, John, we're with segment 33 of the Conversation with John and Pat.
Well, this
33, we hope it'll set us free.
Another good day.
That's right.
I'm going to do a song. It's what you might call a parody. You can take one song and then change the words and make it something else. But this was kind of a funny song anyway, but us two and him took it upon ourselves to write it about us.
Parody. I'm kind of impressed, John.
Well, 26 years of my life I gave to pick guitar in Nashville. 26 years of my life I gave to be a star in Nashville. I'm a-going there where the money's free. Music City is a-calling me. Oh, what a big star I will be there in Music City. Oh, give me a home where the swimming pools roam and the money grows on trees and all the girls want to be squeezed. I'm going to make my debut at Opryland when I get to Nashville. Buy me a bus and my very own band when I get to Nashville. I'm going to set up shop on Music Row, giving lessons to old Hank Snow. You just watch this old country boy go when I get to Nashville. Oh, give me a home where the swimming pools roam and the money grows on trees and all the girls want to be squeezed. Well, I'm a-going there if I have to crawl all the way to Nashville. Date Dolly Parton and that ain't all when I get to Nashville. I'm going to change, when I get there, I'm going to change my name, write a hit song about an old freight train. They'll hang my picture in the Hall of Fame when I get to Nashville. Oh, give me a home where the swimming pools roam and the money grows on trees and all the girls want to be squeezed. That's some sort of song, isn't it?
That is some sort of song.
Now, if I happen to leave out a lyric somewhere along the way, they can call me and I'll sell someone a CD, and that'll take care of the lyric because it's on one of our CDs.
Was there just a slight stumble at some point in that song, John? I thought.
Yeah, we don't do that song real regularly.
But I thought you covered it up really well.
And in fact, I'm not the one that sings it. Phil Comstock in our group is the one that sings it. So I sort of took his place. I stole his thunder, you might say, today.
Well, this may be the greatest segue stretch we've had. I know it'd be the best of the 33, but there was one line about "Give Me the Home," which we'll step in and say there was a segment where we did a sportscast report or a sports writers report from the 1932 Tullahoma Fayetteville game that we labeled as a real example of homerism, or being a homer. And I found one about 2 nights ago that may be worse. And I got it. I got the news article, or the newspaper article, from Ms. Nancy Washburn, our friend, and she recently attended 60th, I believe, and maybe 70th high school reunion. And this was taken from the 1939. I'm leery about taking the paper off the board that she had on display at the reunion, for fear it might damage the news article or the sports writers article. But it's a report of the 1939 Tullahoma-Manchester game, and Tullahoma beat them up pretty good. And
did they have the coffee pot then?
They had the coffee pot and had it established well before this 39 game, and the article, I believe, will refer to it a couple times. And we in no way want to act like we feel this about Manchester and all forms of life. We only want to beat Manchester in the coffee pot game. But
we're reporting facts.
Well, some of this may not be factual. Some of it may have been alleged. Again, from 1939, this would have been played sometime in November of 39. The THS Wildcats wrote finish to their 1939 grid season on Alumni Field in Manchester Friday night, where they rose to new heights in giving a sound thrashing to the football comics that are the Manchester Raiders, and keeping the coffee cup where it belongs, in the Tullahoma High School trophy case. The Cats attained new heights not in beating a team vastly inferior in ability, football sense, and all other traits used to measure grid prowess, but in the self-control they exerted in not turning the contest into a free-for-all and mopping up the field with this alleged football team that didn't know the first principle of sportsmanship or how a loser should act in defeat. And John, don't laugh too much, because it's going to get worse. The Wildcats scored once in each of the first 3 quarters and coasted to a pitifully easy victory. Lemming crashed through the line for touchdowns in the first and second quarters, and England did the honors in the third. Sanders added the extra point on a pass from Lemming. That Sanders had been my father-in-law, Bill Sanders. Yeah. The Red Raiders early discovered that they were no match for the smooth-performing, hard-tackling, clean blocking, which is the long way of saying C-coached Wildcats. And Coach C, spell his name S-E-A-Y, was the coach at the time, and he coached for about 10 or 12 years and had a really nice record. Their answer, in a feeble attempt to cover their inferiority, was a team which slugged, clipped, and roughed, whose profanity was clearly audible to spectators lining the field, and a coach who insisted on dictating to sadly deficient officials who must have received their training calling ping-pong games at Vassar.
This was in the newspaper.
This is in the newspaper. Between the two teams, there was no comparison. Where the Wildcats were perfectly drilled, featuring a pile-driving ground attack that saw England and Lemming take the leading roles in disintegrating the enemy line, the Raiders were poorly coached aggregation who had no offense to speak of, and whose only defense was some third-class baby beef that was about as well organized as sailors on shore leave. And hold on, John, because it's going to get worse. In spite of the poor opposition, the game was not without its highlights. England and Lemming should have eliminated Monday's lab experiment in biology for the perfect demonstrations they gave in dissecting an enemy line. The Wildcat forward wall set lofty standard easily during the season. Friday night played its usual brand of flawless football. On the Wildcats side of the field, where he had absolutely no business, a Manchester deputy or constable who delighted in attempts to show his authority strode into a small group of cheering Wildcat alumni and informed one of them, a former Wildcat gridiron great, now partaking of higher learning at a Southern university, that he was making too much noise and to quit that cussing in quotation marks. The former student quietly informed the hayseed Flatfoot that he had the wrong party and that his only object was seeing the hometown win. The cop said he'd show him whether or not he had the right man and pulled out a blackjack to show this 19-year-old schoolboy that he would have to get somebody to sew up his head. Fortunately for the sideshow villain, the game ended before he could make any ridiculous attempt to use his billy, for if he had, the group of irate Tullahoma fans who had gathered on the spot would have made him eat the weapon as well as his words.
I wonder why this reporter didn't say what was on his mind.
I wonder why he didn't hold back. Let's see. The seamen being his, Coach C's men, were never in any danger as to the outcome of the game, but any Wildcat who went into a pileup with the enemy knew he was in grave danger of being subjected to any form of underhanded tricks capable of being dished out in close quarters, such as twisted arms, legs, necks, knees in the stomachs, and cleats to the face. And the one last part about my father-in-law said, at the end of it, talking about some seniors that played their last game, said, more good news for next year's opponents is that Billy Sanders, a lad with more nerve than Frank Buck, has finished his grid career at THS, and that alternate Captain Lemming has cracked his last line for the Wildcats, and next year must be content with a position in the stands. And that
Mr. Mild-mannered Bill Sanders.
Nerve of Frank Buck, had to look that up. He was a movie star that was hard to handle. Yeah.
Pat, that was delightful.
That was delightful and a great example of what a homer is.
We've enjoyed ourselves, and this is number
33, and it's not the end of the conversations if we're still allowed to come back. Thank you.
Guys, we wouldn't be able to do this without some generous folks out there in our community who have agreed to sponsor this. How about telling us who the sponsors are?
Weichert Realtors, Joe Orr and Associates, my friends.
Builder Supply Company, where I first started.
Stan McNabb, automobile dealerships out on the Manchester and the Shelbyville Highway.
Lester Green, McCord, and Toma Insurance.
And Smart Bank of Tullahoma on North Jackson Street, where I bank.
And Clayton Shoe Store with Miss Florence Hull.
Where everybody buys their shoes.
That's right. And you can get your foot measured.
Get your foot measured there, and I tell you what, folks, management is very, very excited to be able to do this. These guys have done a great job over the past couple of years sharing not just Tullahoma history, but history of our whole region around here, and it's important to all of us that we learn and understand and appreciate that. So, folks, don't you forget Memorial Day weekend on Sunday the 27th, starting at 4, going till Monday the 28th, ending at 6. It's Conversations with John and Pat Marathon.
Can we ask one question?
What's that?
Is it going to be back-to-back solid with just
solid
us and our fine sponsors?
Solid, baby, solid.
Wow.
Watch out, Andy Griffith. Here they come.
Hello, everyone. I'm John Rickman.
And I'm Pat Welch. And John, we're here today with segment 34 of the Conversation with John and Pat. 34.
That's good.
Hardly wait for more.
I know that's true. You know, this segment will fall somewhere about the time of Thanksgiving. And this is a little song about our family gatherings back where I came from. We'd have family get-togethers back when I was just a lad. We would finish milking early, then dress in the best we had. After Mama fried the chicken and our hair was brushed and combed, We'd all load up in the truck and off to Granny's we would go. In Granny's house, the little kid had hardly room to stand. Folks laughing loud and hugging, slapping backs and shaking hands. So I'd sneak off with the cousins till it's time to say the grace. Uncle Ike would give the blessing, then us kids would take our place. We sat at the second table eating chicken necks and wings, a leftover dab of gravy juice and fat back from the beans. Fresh peach cobbler without peaches, melted ice cream from the churn. Wasn't very much to choose from once them grown-ups had their turn. I sat at a folding table on a black piano stool. I could hear them grown-ups talking way off in another room. All the ladies swapping gossip between each bite and happy sigh. Grandpa Lil would tell a joke and they'd all laugh until they cried. Old Lane Myrtle kept complaining about the new shoes on her feet. All the men kept on bragging about the good things they had to eat. How their plates all needed sideboards 'cause food was piled so high. I just sat back in my corner wishing for a breast or a thigh. We sat at the second table eating chicken necks and wings, a leftover dab of gravy juice and fat back from the beans. Fresh peach cobbler without peaches, melted ice cream from the churn. Wasn't very much to choose from once them grown-ups had their turn. Hot dog, hot dog.
Did y'all have fried chicken at Thanksgiving too, or this?
Well, we had most time
the family being together.
Turkey and
Okay.
dressing and cranberry sauce and sweet potatoes, you know, all that sort of thing. Real good, real good. Always
And
liked
did you go to your grandparents for that too?
Yeah, we went there. And, you know, when I was a teacher, Ms. Joanne Penn and cafeteria ladies always did a great job with the turkey and dressing at schools. You go during Thanksgiving, you know, they normally had a day for, since you're on the school board, do they invite you to eat turkey and dressing with them?
Sometimes what's coming up though, that almost every school has a Veterans Day ceremony, and they really do a nice job at each one of those. I would encourage, if this segment comes up before that Veterans Day, that you try to attend one of those at one of the schools, because
something's
really
going
well
on. Well, this will be aired afterwards, but at South Jackson South Jackson Civic Center. I want to talk today, Pat, about an article I received not too long ago from a friend. He's from Chapel Hill, as I am, and he thought this might be interesting to me. His name was Tom Hurt, and this was written in 1952 by the sports writer of the Nashville Tennessean. Russ Melvin wrote it. One of the outstanding examples of sportsmanship that I've ever seen took place last week in Lynchburg, involving Chapel Hill football team coached by Charlie Neighbors. In the Lynchburg Chapel Hill game, Lynn Huffer, senior tackle for the Raiders. Now, this was back in 1952. Did I say that? I might not have.
You have now. We've got identified 52.
Lynn Huffer suffered a broken leg and was taken to the Shelbyville Hospital. Huffer, a good defensive tackle for 2 years, had a terrific letdown. It meant the end of his playing days in high school. Last Saturday night, 15 members of the Chapel Hill football team visited Huffer in the hospital, bringing him gifts to cheer him up. Joe Nunley, the coach there at Lynchburg, said his boys were high in their praise of the Rockets and their sportsmanship. And the editor has to go on to say it must make a coach such as Charlie Neighbors feel proud to know that he's turned out so many outstanding citizens, as well as a hard-fighting team. Now, the reason I pursued this a little farther is because I knew Joe Nunley. He was a Chapel Hill native. Also, he went on later to become professor at MTSU.
He was very well respected at MTSU.
Very well respected. Good guy, really a good historian. And
John, did he teach in the Department of Ed, or did he teach in the Department of History?
I think it was Department of Education, and then later on he became the alumni director at MTSU.
Okay.
And Joe was always a nice, friendly gentleman. He was a nice guy. But what I didn't know about him, I didn't know he coached at Lynchburg. And I called his brother, Shot Nunley, over at McMinnville, and asked Shot, I didn't know Joe coached at Lynchburg. He said, yeah, he did. And he said that this team this year was the one that ended Shirley Major's 72-game winning streak.
Wow.
And Shot went on to tell me a little bit about that. He said that that game between Huntland and Lynchburg, both having good teams, good records, it was played at Shelbyville High School because they could seat more people. And 6,000 people showed up to witness that.
No, there'd been a whole lot of them standing.
It probably was. But Shirley Majors had a boy on his football team by the name of Buck Roman. No, that was Joe's boy, Buck Roman, tailback. And then Johnny Majors ran for Shirley over there at Huntland, and but they lived real close to each other, almost next door to each other in Lynchburg, as I understand.
Well, we want to make sure we're not chastising the Majors family. We've had one segment on them, and this was legal because they had checked with the state office when Coach Shirley Majors he left Lynchburg and went to Huntland. In his first year coaching Huntland, he got beat by Lynchburg, and I believe one of those sons Johnny was the main reason why he got beat, and he told his wife that night that was the last time he's going to be beat by one of his sons. And to make it legal, they rented a house in Huntland and supposedly lived over there 3 or 4 nights a week to make it legal. But I'm sure they did go back to Lynchburg some.
This team at Lynchburg was so good that one game in particular, they played Byrdstown, which had a team at that time, and the managers dressed at halftime, and they scored 2 or 3 touchdowns. The score was 88-0, and 19 players went on to play college football from that Lynchburg team.
Wow!
So we want to say a salute to these folks in Lynchburg on having such a good team. And Pat,
their rivalries with Huntland and with Chapel Hill is really outstanding and
strong. Yes.
I saw some games. In fact, I coached in a game when I was student teaching in 1975, and I've seen plenty of games where there was better athletes, but I don't know if I've ever seen one that's harder played. That was a really, really hard game, and I'm sure it's just one of many between those two schools, and Huntland the same way.
Sorry to interrupt you, but they're giving us the hook.
They give us the hook. That's probably for good reason, and so that we'll shut down segment 34, John. But that's not the end of the stories. We got all kinds of them to come.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Clayton has been Tullahoma's family shoe store for over 100 years with a reputation for fashion and personal service. And the tradition continues today. Stop by Clayton and see our large selection of fine shoes.
We're gonna fit your style. We're gonna make you smile. Service and quality at Clayton Shoe Store. We're gonna fit your style.
Hello, everyone. I'm John Rickman.
And this is Pat Welch, and we're here today for segment 35 of the Conversations with John and Pat.
It's been so good.
It has been good.
I've got a song here we've done many years ago, and some of these songs come back from the 70s, and I've gone
1970s.
What did I say?
70s. I just want to make sure establish which century.
Yeah, that's it. There once was a fellow they call Mr. Clay. He had but 2 clients and they wouldn't pay. He was a lawyer. At last of starvation he grew so afraid that he courted and married a wealthy old maid. At the wedding the lawyer made one big mistake, was not in omitting the wine or the cake. The ring was well chosen, they had a big feast, but the lawyer did not get a warranty deed. He's a very unfortunate, very unfortunate, very unfortunate man. Oh yes, he's a very unfortunate, very unfortunate, very unfortunate man. That night in their chambers the lady arose and began to prepare to retire and repose. Her husband sat near her, admiring her charm that gave him such pleasure to hold in his arms. She went to the washstand to bathe her fair face, thus she destroyed all her beauty and grace. Her trembling husband became very faint when he saw on a towel it was nothing but paint. She went to the mirror to take down her hair. When she had done this, her scalp was plumb bare. She said, "Don't be frightened, when I go to bed, I'll put a sock cap on my head before I get into bed." Little bumble.
That was no problem.
She hung her false hair on a wall on the peg. Then she proceeded to screw off her leg. Her trembling husband got quite a surprise when she asked if he'd come help pop out her glass eye. Now all you young men who would marry for life, be sure to examine that intended wife. Don't be like the lawyer who trusted his eye and a little bit later got quite a surprise. He's a very unfortunate, very unfortunate, very unfortunate man. Oh yes, he's a very unfortunate, very unfortunate, very unfortunate man. Woo! Lordy mercy. You know those words come slow when you're under strain, trying to remember. Duress.
Yes.
Yeah. But anyway.
Where are we headed, John? I'm going to have a hard time with a segue on that. I believe we were going to talk about Wallace Wade today.
Yeah, and there is no segue, I don't think.
No, we just have to go from probably getting sued by somebody connected with the government and the Disabilities Act.
Oh, don't bring it up, Pat.
Well, let's go to Wallace Wade. I did a little research back when East Lincoln Elementary was redone, and what a great addition to our community. But it's on the campus of the old Tullahoma High School and the old football field and baseball field, I believe. It's all connected and it's known as Wade Field. And some people, a lot of people in Tullahoma still don't know, those that knew the field was over there, that it was named after. It's named after Wallace Wade. And Wallace Wade had a time period in Tullahoma, but I'm going to skip and go forward first. After Tullahoma, he went to Vanderbilt as what would have essentially been a defensive coordinator, and that was in 1919 and 1920. And he coached for Dan McGugin, whose name is on a lot of the facilities at Vanderbilt. In fact, I think the academic headquarters of the building is named as McGugin Center. But They were undefeated and Southern Conference champions both years, and he was a hot commodity. And he was summoned to Kentucky and to Alabama, and he interviewed in Tuscaloosa, and I believe got an offer pretty quick, but he felt like he owed it to himself to go also to Kentucky. So he went to Lexington, had a short interview, and the Board of Trustees met for about 3 or 4 hours, and he was kind of a short-tempered kind of guy. And he ended up knocking on the door and said, if y'all can't decide by now, I'm out of here. And supposedly, he said that no team of Kentucky ever beat one of his again, and he claimed later in life that didn't happen, but for sure he barged in the meeting and took his name out and went to Alabama. Why don't you put his picture up there, Philip? There's Wallace Wade there, and that was after he'd been at Alabama and was then at that point coaching at Duke. At Alabama, his first year would have been 1925, I believe. And his first year was in 1923. And they won the Southern Conference that year. And by 25, they were invited to the Rose Bowl. They played Washington and was way behind at halftime. And he had coached with somebody. Well, I tell you who it was Coach McGugan, who originally was from Iowa. But he heard him make an impassioned plea to his players about the opponent, and I think at that time was Michigan. Their grandfathers of the players that were beating them had put their grandfathers in their graves. And evidently Wallace Wade borrowed that line, and though he had no idea of any of what had been involved. Yeah, he got them real stirred up. They came back and won 21-20, and that's, by a lot of football historians in the South, is considered the greatest game as far as the South was concerned, because at the time they were really looked down on as being uneducated and inept and incapable of playing with the Midwest and Northeastern teams primarily, but this Washington team was really, really good. And then he won the next year. They won the national championship again. In 1930, he won a national championship after he had told the Alabama administration he was probably going to leave because he didn't think Alabama was putting enough emphasis on football. So he went to Duke and never won a national championship there, but he went to Rose Bowl 2 more times. And I believe his 1938 team was undefeated and unscored on. And then played, and I believe it was one of General Neyland's team in a bowl game and got beat. But they played 10 games without being scored on. All right, let's go back then to his Tullahoma roots if we've got time. He originally was from Trenton, Tennessee, Trenton, which is a small town in West Tennessee. Mm-hmm. And normally the people in Gibson County, where that's located, pronounce it Trenton. And he went to Trenton Peabody School, which is still there today, and was quite a good player and was a good, did really well in school. And he went to Brown, which was it's an Ivy League school in Rhode Island, I believe, and played on a Rose Bowl team there. And then he went into World War I as a captain in the cavalry. And I'm not sure he was in direct combat or not, but I know he served in the Army at the close of World War I. And when he came back to Trenton, he told his father he wanted to coach. And his father wasn't really excited about that, but there was a private school in Tullahoma, Fitzgerald and Clark, that the city owned the building. There it is. Almost looked like a castle. The city built this school with the idea they would lease it to, and several different groups had it. Fitzgerald and Clark had it for 4 or 5 years, and it burned. And when Tullahoma rebuilt, they then started their own public high school. But this was a private school that Wallace Wade came to. Show the gym, Philip. There's the gym, and that did not burn, and it became the Tullahoma High School gym, and then became the East Junior High gym. And
that's where I coached in my early years there.
There was a lot of successful, great victories earned by John Rickman and that gym right there.
We sure hope so.
That's right. His first team was in 1919. They won several games, I think about 7 or 8 games. The next year they were undefeated and were declared state champions. That's a picture of the state championship team. 2 of those members there went to Vanderbilt with him, and several of them played at UT. In fact, I believe there was one by last name was Bomar, who was supposed to have been a great player, and I think an ancestor of Mr. Bomar, who was a real successful attorney in Bedford County. Yeah, and we're getting the motion now that and after he left 2 years, it had a great impact on Tullahoma. And Wallace Wade in the field, then at the public school when the city rebuilt after the fire, the football field was named.
Thank you for sharing that, buddy.
Well, I had a great time researching that when East Lincoln was dedicated, and I've had a great time presenting it today, John. That ends segment 35, but it's not the end of our conversations. John and I've got a lot to go. Thank you.
Get your news first, fast, and free with your news leader on 6 every Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday nights at 6, 8, and 10 p.m. Local weather, sports, community calendar events, and a comprehensive look at the latest news stories and news makers as only a video news broadcast can do. Get it first, fast, and free with News Leader on Channel 6, your local information network.
Hello, everyone. I'm John Rickman.
And this is Pat Welch. And John, we're here for the Conversations of John and Pat, segment 36. 36.
It's going. It's there. I want to do a song for you, Pat.
All right.
This is one that people remember. I think it was recorded by the Kingston Trio in 1958. It's called Tom Dooley.
Oh, yeah.
Very good song.
Yeah. And the Kingston Trio was really good folk singers that I can, I've YouTubed them a couple times and just got very, going back to the 60s.
All songs do not have to be complicated. Now, if you folks out there want to look at my fingers playing the chords, it's only 2 chords in this song.
As musically illiterate as you think I am, John, that's a capo you got above those fingers, isn't it?
That's right. There have been many songs written about the eternal triangle. This one tells of a Mr. Grayson, a beautiful woman, and a man named Tom Dooley. When the sun rises tomorrow, Tom Dooley must die. Hang down your head, Tom Dooley. Hang down your head and cry. Hang down your head, Tom Dooley. Poor boy, you're bound to die. I met her on the mountain. There I took her life. I met her on the mountain. Stabbed her with my knife. Hang down your head, Tom Dooley. Hang down your head and cry. Hang down your head, Tom Dooley. Poor boy, you're bound to die. This time tomorrow, reckon where I'll be. Hadn't have been for Grayson, I'd been in Tennessee. Hang down your head, Tom Dooley. Hang down your head and cry. Hang down your head, Tom Dooley. Poor boy, you're bound to die. This time tomorrow, reckon where I'll be. Down in some lonesome valley, hanging from a white oak tree. we're bound to die.
Wow, John. That
1958. I thought that was comparable.
I
was
to
young.
The Kingston Trio, but the introduction was far superior.
Well, thank you, Pat.
Yeah.
I doubt that, but you know.
No, I'm not just playing lip service here.
We're going to show several pictures today of a letter that my daddy, we had a secretary, old secretary, which is the same thing as a desk up in our front room at Chapel Hill. And there were letters in there. I remember these letters laying there. Nobody ever bothered them. And they had been passed down from my great-great-grandmother's sister, I think. I think that's the way it came. But one of the letters, I'll let Philip, if he will, put that letter up. This letter was one of those. And it you know, it's very fluid writing. And it was to Colonel Aaron Boyd. He calls him General Boyd. That's flattery, I guess, but really Colonel Boyd was the proper ranking, whatever that part of service.
Who's writing the letter?
A fellow named Edward Zane Carroll Judson. We didn't know this in the beginning. This is what's really fantastic. Sometimes these letters can be there and you don't know who they are from. Well, it was from EZCJ, or Edward Z.C. Judson. And there's a fellow north of Chapel Hill who is a historian, and I showed him the letter, and he said, you know, I think I know who that is. And we're going to tell him in just a minute. And let me read the letter. Go ahead, and maybe you can see that on the TV screen. This is written from the Franklin House nearly a year ago. Dear sir, I promised you a likeness that was given me by your son, drawn by his own hand from a looking glass. They didn't call mirrors looking glass before him. I have just found the picture and hastened to send it to you, enclosing it through your kind friend, Mr. Eli S. Wood of Nashville. Take it, my dear sir, as a memorial of your noble son, whom I love dearly. And when you look upon it, I pray you sometimes think of me, as one who has seen some hard knocks in this world and who has been sinned against more than sinning. That's sort of interesting. But you can tell whoever wrote this was he was a well-written person, and the cursive writing that he learned used was so nice. It was written from the Franklin House, but it has no date on it. But this young man...
Do you know where the Franklin House is?
Well, either Philadelphia or New York, I think. I was told this not too long ago. I found out that was maybe the place. Show the picture of the young man that's a picture of Joseph Britton Boyd, probably some distant kin to Harry Britton. I don't know, maybe. I've always thought that anyway. But they lived above. Story. They lived. It'll pull somebody else into the legend.
That's right.
But anyway, that was a picture of him. Now, Philip showed the last picture. This was Edward Zane Carroll Judson, alias Ned Buntline. On the left, you see that's Ned Buntline, along with Buffalo Bill Cody and Texas Jack. Let me tell you a little bit about Edward Zane Carroll Judson. He was a ruffian. He was an entrepreneur. He was the first person to put out, as I understand, dime Western novels in the West. And some of them were written about Buffalo Bill. And then later on, he would produce Buffalo Bill in some of his stage shows.
Huh.
So this is a very interesting letter from a man that my wife and I drove not too long ago to Cody, Wyoming, and there we went to the Buffalo Bill Museum. I took the letter that you saw in the beginning to the curators, and they were carried away about that.
That's great.
It was. It's a good letter, and I would like to challenge anyone out there that might have old letters in your files. You can never know where they're from. Another little thing about Ned Buntline.
John, how do you spell that last name?
Buntline?
Mm-hmm.
Buntline. You thought you could trick me, didn't you?
No, I knew you could spell it. I just wanted to be sure I was hearing correctly there.
But on the old Wyatt Earp show, I don't know if you remember that. It was a serial show back in the 50s, early 60s.
Do I remember it? Keep going. I've got a great
He
story
had
on
a
that.
Buntline special. A Buntline special, and that was told that Ned Buntline made these large guns and gave them to certain people, one being Wyatt Earp.
John, I'm going to follow through with not as historical, but you mentioned that TV show, and you're the first one that I've ever talked to or heard speak of that show. But they had a commercial when I was about 5 years old, and Wyatt had taken a villain and tied his feet and raised him up to some barn rafters and had him eye level upside down. And he put a gun to his head and he said, "So-and-so, I'm going to make you speak upside down or I'm going to turn you inside out." Well, me and I've been 5, my brother, ex brother, been about 4, and the next one had been about 3. We thought that was the greatest cowboy scene we had ever seen. And my mother took a nap in the afternoon normally, and we snuck outside when we were supposed to be sleeping and took every toy we had, tricycle, metal cars that you'd pedal, anything, and stacked them up. And I climbed that tower to the first branch, and we tied a rope to my feet and tied it to that branch, and then my brothers pulled the lower toys out, and I went straight down. And they pulled out a cap gun, and for about 5 minutes told me that I was going to speak upside down or they're going to turn me inside out.
That's why the media needs to be real careful about what you present.
Correct. And
and it's time to go, Pat.
After about 5 minutes, the blood came to my head. My mother was up from the nap, and I saw her upside down through the kitchen window, and her eyes, she came out with a butcher knife, and that was the start of my neck problems because she cut me down in one swipe. and your statement is correct. The media needs to be careful about what they project.
And we need to be careful about what we say.
That is correct. That is correct.
And maybe they'll have us back.
And I don't know if my mother ever recovered from finding her son hanging upside down in a tree.
All right, let's sign off.
Hey, we need to sign off, John. That was segment 36, but that's not the end of our stories.
No.
We've got lots of conversations to go. Thank you.
Why Joe Orr Realtors? I'll tell you why. Joe Orr Realtors is Tullahoma's largest full-time, full-service real estate company. With a 22-year heritage of quality and service, Joe Orr Realtors is one of the area's most recognized and respected names in the real estate profession. An unparalleled package of real estate services delivered to you by 27 dedicated and trained professional agents, excellent administrative staff, property management, relocation director, and 2 of the area's finest auctioneers. Why Joe Orr Realtors? Simply because they're the best. Joe Orr Realtors, 209 South Jackson Street, Tullahoma, 455-0555.
Talking history about this and that. It's conversations with John and Pat. With John and Pat. With John and Pat.
Hello, everyone. 101. John Rickman here.
And this is Pat Welch. And John, we're here for segment 101, the encore of the Conversations with John and Pat.
Back in the country, Pat, if a farmer, you buy eggs from a farmer, lots of times they'll throw an extra one in case one is not good, not is rotten or whatever.
Or a baker's dozen, the 13th.
Baker's dozen.
That's right.
So this is a baker's dozen here.
This is a true encore, called and by heavy demand from our fans and from management.
This is a little slower song that I've been doing, is one that Jimmy Rogers did, but I like it. It sort of has a Stephen Foster
John, I noticed that you
Sam.
made sure you knew who the management had to chip in, who the writer of the previous segment song was.
He corrected me.
Yes.
No, he didn't. He gave me information I didn't have.
He aided us.
I'm getting tired of these big city lights, Tired of the glamour, tired of the nights, and all of my dreams I'm wandering once more. Back to my home and that old river shore. I'm so sad and weary, far away from home. Missing Mississippi and you, dear. Days are sad and dreary everywhere I roam. Missing Mississippi and you. Wandering this wide world over, always alone and so blue, longing for my homeland, muddy water shore. Missing Mississippi and you.
Oh, John, that's some moving. Even management chipped in a little bit on that.
He knew that. That was a Jimmy Rogers, but you know, Merle Haggard did that, and a lot of other people did too. It was a good song.
I can't listen to anything melancholy like that with the river description in it without thinking about the old story about General Stonewall Jackson that we've mentioned before. He was mortally wounded at Chancellorsville, lost his arm, but while he's rehabbing, he got pneumonia. And he was lucid up to the point of his death, and he was a strong Christian, really devout Christian. And right before he died, he said that he was getting ready to cross over the river and rest in the trees on the other shore. I thought what a great analogy to death that was.
Good picture. Yeah. We're going to talk about a fella that grew up in Warren County near Viola. And show the first picture, if you will. That's him in the center with the vest on. He was principal at Forest School in Chapel Hill. His name was Jess Nunley. And he is the father of Dr. Joe Nunley, who is at MTSU and a professor there. And also he is the father of Shot Nunley, who is at McMinnville. And I interviewed Shot not too long ago about his dad. His dad was there at Chapel Hill for many, many years, and
John, let me make sure I'm right. That's at
Chapel Hill there.
Mm-hmm. The Nunley that Warren County, it's his father while he was at Chapel Hill, because that lady's
right.
To his
This
right's got a Forest.
Yeah, this
shirt,
Mr. Nunley
sweater on.
Was I'll tell you a little bit about his upbringing. He was born 1892 in the mountains of Warren County near Viola. During that time, approximately 70% of Warren County's population lived in the woodlands, mountains, hills, and hollows. Jess was one of 17 children and lived totally impoverished. He lived in a one-room, dirt-floored shack at the head of Fult's Cove. His dad, Norman, married 3 times, and Jess's mom, Letty, was the father's second wife.
And his first 2 dying from childbirth or sickness?
1 and 3. 1, 2, and this is about the second one, his mom. In 1902, a flu epidemic in that region took the life of Mom Letty, and an infant brother took both of them. At just 10 years of age, using crude tools and whatever lumber available, Jess built a coffin large enough to hold both bodies. He borrowed a team of mules.
Wait a minute. Jess built, when he was 10 years old, built his mother's and his siblings' coffin?
Where his dad was at this time is unknown. There's no story about that. But he saw the need to go ahead and build a coffin. He borrowed a team of mules.
John, sometime I hope today gets a little bit more cheery, but keep going.
It will. and he put both bodies, mother and brother, in that coffin and took them to Mount Zion Cemetery. And education seemed to be Jess's light in his world. He attended the Todd School there at Viola, and he was a smart kid. And later on, he would, Mr. Todd, the headmaster, would ask the people in Warren County, the education folks, you need to hire this guy as a teacher. he shows a lot of promise. So he did this. Jess was a teacher in Warren County in some of the little small schools. But Jess in 1916 yearned for some freedom. Let's go ahead and show the next picture, if you will. Now, this is Mr. Nunley right there at the top right. That's him. And, you know, that's a good thing for a principal to do. Get a picture with the basketball team.
Successful one.
Yeah, that's my mother, third from the right there. That's Kat Rickman. She's 102 now.
Wow.
That's my mother. And the next picture.
John, you've gone all. Shouldn't this have been segment 100? You've held the best for the encore.
We wanted to keep it Tullahoma, but this is a Tullahoma Connect. Mr. Nunley was principal there at Chapel Hill. That second to the right is a Tullahoma connection. That's Mr. Robert E. Lee, and he was on the faculty over at Chapel Hill. Mr. Robert E. Lee became superintendent in Lewisburg, and then later on superintendent in Tullahoma. Yeah, and let's go to the next picture. Who is this man? Let me tell you about this gentleman. Mr. Jess Nunley, finally, he taught a few years, and he said he got tired of teaching, wanted to see some adventure in life. So he got on his motorcycle, Indian motorbikes, with two friends, and they headed out west. And they wound up in Columbus, Mexico. And he and his buddy found jobs building corduroy roads. And just so happened, the notorious...
Which is taking logs.
Side by side, making streets or roads with logs.
Now that would be some hard work right there.
And they were working hard. Just so happened, the notorious Mexican revolutionary, Francisco Pancho Villa, attacked the small town of Columbus where they were working. And gunfire broke out on the streets, killing 17 citizens. In a short period of time, U.S. General John Blackjack Pershing's troops sent by President Woodrow Wilson came along pursuing Villa's band. The three Tennessee lads were unharmed, but Jess immediately decided he'd seen enough excitement and teaching really wasn't so bad after all.
Being raised in a shack, dirt floors with 17 children was better than being attacked by Pancho Villa.
That's right. The friends made it back to the mid-state on two of the Indian bikes using parts off one which had broken down and left on the roadside. Now, one of those guys that went with him was Wendell Oakley, and I guess Wendell Oakley was the dad of the Wendell Oakley I knew, probably.
Of the druggist.
Yeah.
And his son Kim would have gone to school with me.
Yeah. I know they're shot. When I interviewed him, he knew all of them. But when he got back, Middle Tennessee State Teachers College at Murfreesboro become a 4-year institution. So he decided to attend there, and he taught at Mulberry, and he taught in maybe a few other positions, but he wound up getting this principal's job over at Chapel Hill. And he recalled there were two troublemakers in the school that teachers had warned him against, and they heckled him during an assembly, and he took
that was assembly, from what I understand, on opening day.
Yeah, on opening day.
So he'd been down there on the auditorium stage, laying the law down, and if somebody's heckling, that would have.
He took them both by the ear, and took them out the front steps. Said, "Don't come back till you act right." And all the students, from that time on, they respected him because he's going to do what he was going to keep order. Now, they stayed in Chapel Hill over there for about 16 years, and Joe Nunley, the son, who was a coach at Lynchburg, and I think we made mention that Joe Nunley was a good coach. He was also, Joe Nunley, the son, was also assistant coach under Creed McClure at McMinnville.
Either City or Central.
City or Central, one or the other.
Mr. McClure went from there to Tullahoma.
Yeah, right, and Joe went probably to Lynchburg, and Joe had rheumatic fever, and I think he decided to go to school and get a good education and all. But Jess Nunley, the dad, this is an interesting story. When he decided to come back to Chapel Hill, everything had loaded up. They'd taken everything back to Viola. That's where they were going to live next. And all they had left was a upright piano and a Jersey cow.
That was left in Chapel Hill.
Left in Chapel Hill. They had a little, farming area. So they loaded that upright piano and put the cow on a halter and put it beside the upright piano in the truck. He said that cow was real gentle and rode all the way to Viola. Don't you know that was a sight going through Shelbyville and Tullahoma?
With a piano and a cow.
Show the next picture there, Philip. Now, Joe Nunley, the son of Mr. Jess, would have these occasions. He called them a coon hunter.
Now, John, let me ask you a question,
Yes,
too.
sir.
From our Rotary days together, Shot Nunley was a big Rotarian, I believe,
was a
in McMinnville.
He was a governor.
Okay.
He was
All
Rotary
right.
governor.
So it's his grandfather that coached your mother.
Yeah. His father.
What did I say? Grandfather.
He actually did coach. The principal just stood in the picture. Down on the other end, we didn't show that. There was the coaches down on the far end.
But he was.
But that's a good thing for a principal to do. Getting them pictures. Get those pictures. Let those parents know that you're with the team.
Well, I've shook you up 4 or 5 times here now. Now this is this coaching and teaching reunion that
MTSU professors, people from Chapel Hill, people from Lynchburg, Joe Nunley acquaintances, they all come up there. Some people cook.
What Joe Nunley, though, was kind of revered by the coaches that would go to summer school a lot in Middle Tennessee.
He's well thought of.
What was the deal there? Was there just a natural gravitation to him?
He was a good storyteller.
Yeah.
Joe could tell a good story. Show the next picture there, Philip. This is, you know who that is with a hat on in the back? That is Dr. Don Emery. He was Joe would give people assignments, and Dr. Emery was a part of the cooking crew. Was this when Dr. Emery was at teaching at MTSU before? This was 1976, I believe, or 75 or 76.
All right, he'd been at MTSU at the time.
But that's Dr. Sams that's in front.
He was a revered teacher there too.
Yeah, those names. And brother Womack, Bob Womack was well thought of.
He was a historian.
Bob LaLance. And I was in the musician group. I didn't have to cook. All I had to do was eat and play music. That's my...
John,
do we have another picture?
Our encore. Wait just a second here. I got to butt in here. This the encore. We're going to take our time today. I taught for 3 years after I got out of school, and this deal, I didn't realize I'm not near as...
You weren't invited.
I'm not as jealous now as I was, because I imagined something a whole lot more luxurious in that shack that y'all gathered at. But it was a real invitation to be coveted.
Shirley Majors was there. First time I went, Shirley Majors was there, and I thought, golly, I'd listen to him tell stories. And I'd listen to those guys telling stories, and it was on a cloud. It was nice.
Well, I didn't realize that Dr. Embry was
yes.
He was on the cooking crew.
Yeah.
Now, from what I understood, that most of the stories were told by Mr. Nunley and some of those MTSU professors, and somebody that would have been my age, if I'd ever been illustrious enough to get the invite, he was there to get the firewood. And
is there one more picture, Philip?
Do the labor.
Yeah, that's my daddy on the left. That's Ike Rickman on the left.
Now, how did he get invited?
Dean, well, he's related to me, Pat. He's related.
Wow.
And then Dean Delk, my cousin's husband. And then there's
an esteemed. They've got schools named after him.
There's Joe Nunley, and the guy on the right was our neighbor across the road in Chapel Hill, Clarence Powell, a farmer. And Joe invited folks there, and we all loved it. And they loved Joe, and Joe loved them. Is that all the pictures, Philip?
I hope Dr. Emery gets to see this.
Dr. Emery helped me out with those pictures. And Philip, could we go to that one in front of the shack again with all the people?
Yeah, I want to see that, so I won't be so upset about never being invited.
You know, a man needs to know how to dress when he goes to something like that. And Dr. Emery is there in white pants. He's the one in the front, squatted down in front with white pants on. You know a doctor's a doctor, no matter where he goes.
That's right. He's got a certain level of prestige to live up to.
Thank you, Dr. Emery. Appreciate that.
That is a great picture and a
great
story.
Encore, that's what we have.
101 is over. We hope management allows the marathon, and we may go into future negotiations. But right now we're over and out, even though we've got a story or two left somewhere. Thank y'all.
Talking history about this and that. It's Conversations with John and Pat. With John and Pat. With John and Pat.